Do you know which metal is absolutely essential for everything that is ahead of us in terms of technology? Artificial intelligence, electric cars, renewable energy, data centers, military defense, even quantum computing. Virtually all major trends depends on a metal that is almost indispensable. I know this time we're not talking about gold, silver, or even lithium or rare earths. We're talking about a much more conventional metal, copper. A resource that doesn't shine, isn't stored in vaults, and, until not long ago, was on almost no one's radar. And yet, without copper, there is no electrical future. It's that simple, that clear, which is exactly what explains news headlines and actions like this.
President Donald J. Trump takes action to address the threat to national security from imports of copper.
As you can see, copper has become a top priority for the White House. In fact, not long ago, last November, they made this decision.
United States declares copper a critical resource for its economic and energy security.
And the most striking thing about this whole story is that while everyone is chasing the stocks of artificial intelligence and chatbot companies, many professional hands have been buying something completely different: mines, and tons of this reddish metal buried in the ground. The result? The copper industry has begun to shine. Over the last year, the price of this raw material has risen by 35%. But that's not the best part. The best part has been the evolution of producers. Take, for example, the Global X Copper Miners ETF, which focuses on shares of copper mining companies. Specifically, it has 47 companies in its portfolio. Well, over the last year, it has shot up by more than 130%. In other words, we have a technological revolution that is largely dependent on copper, while the price of this mineral is skyrocketing, and the White House considers it critical to national security. All you have to do is connect the dots. Copper is much more important than we might think. And guess what? Many experts say that there will be a significant copper shortage in the coming years. Keep an eye on this, because could this mean we'll see much higher prices? How far could mining companies go if that happens? What exactly is happening with this industry? To what extent is national security at risk? Well, in this video, we're going to tell you why copper could become the new oil of the digital age, why many experts believe that a historic shortage is looming in the markets, and what implications this whole story has for our pockets. So stick around, because this is going to interest you. Pay attention to what's coming. Let's get started. But first, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, I've got some news for you. At Visual Factory, we've created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education. The ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you will learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain, in a clear and simple way, the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS. You get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better, since we send each episode of the series by email and every edition is unique. If you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them and you won't be able to access them later. But with that said, let's get into the video. VisualEconomik community, as I was saying at the beginning of last November, the US Department of the Interior, through the Geological Survey, did something that went largely unnoticed, but is of crucial importance. It added copper to the country's list of critical minerals. Yes, you heard correctly. Critical. No, not important. Critical. On the same level as rare earths, cobalt, and 57 other minerals considered vital to the US economy and security. And in this case, the reason is very simple. The copper supply chain is vital to the modern economy. But at the same time, it's also much more vulnerable than we would like it to be. For years, depressed prices and environmental regulations have meant that, in general, little has been invested, and that the places where investment has been made are not exactly a panacea for legal or geopolitical security. And of course, now that consumption is skyrocketing, well, many security experts are throwing their hands up in horror with a metal that is the third most mined in the world, behind only iron and aluminium. We're not exactly talking about a marginal or niche activity. No, we're talking about one of the major mining activities that will take a lot of time and money to catch up. And let's see, there is money, but time is precisely what we don't have to spare. But let's start at the beginning. Why does everyone suddenly need so much copper? Copper has been part of our lives for over 10,000 years. It's literally the first metal that humanity learned to work with. And with the advent of electricity, it became indispensable. Basically because wherever there is electricity, there is copper. Despite this, for a long time, demand has been growing in a relatively stable, predictable manner, without any major surprises, until now, when demand for this red metal has started to heat up like never before. Several phenomena have suddenly come together and changed the rules of the game. The first and most important, but almost most predictable, is economic growth and population growth. Look, in 2024, per capita copper consumption was 3.3 kilograms per person. With a population of more than 8.1 billion, that is almost 27 million tons of refined copper consumed in a single year. Well, projections from organizations such as the UN indicate that the global population will continue to grow in the coming years at a rate of around 1% per year. And if we add to that the trend of economic growth, then what do we find? An increase in demand of more than 20% in the next 5 years alone, up to 2030. We're talking about the need to increase production by millions of tons each year. So what's the problem? Well, copper mines are not exactly quick to get up and running. To give you an idea, it takes more than 10 years to get a copper mine, into production. And often the same time frame extends to 15, 18, or even 20 years. In other words, the increases in production that we'll be seeing in the coming years will be the result of investment decisions made more than a decade ago, when many of the factors we're about to discuss were not on the table. Pay attention to this. And even in the longer term, look, it's not that there's no copper in the world, but there aren't as many high-quality deposits anymore. Let me explain. As the most accessible and highest quality deposits have been mined, what we have these days are smaller deposits and a lower concentration of metal in the earth or rock. And what does this mean? It means that to extract the same amount of copper, much more material has to be moved and processed. This makes the whole process more expensive. It's what's known in the industry as lower ore grade, and what we might refer to in everyday language as a pain in the neck. Well, there's that. And there are also far fewer discoveries each year. The result? No one should expect a miracle of loaves and fishes. If there's tension in the market due to high demand, prices will be structurally pushed upward. This will happen even if there are fluctuations in the short term, because this is fundamentally a thesis that points to the coming years, not the coming months. Now, temporarily, the bursting of the Chinese real estate bubble has given us some breathing room, but let me stress, this is only temporary. The market knows this, and that's why, in general, prices continue to rise. But as I said, there may be sharp fluctuations in the coming months. The important thing is that this does not change the process we're talking about at all. If demand continues to grow, and from everything we're about to tell you, it doesn't seem like it will stop, copper will keep soaring. How much? Until other solutions become more competitive or help cool prices down. But that isn't close yet. There's still plenty of room. And when it comes to economic growth and demographics, we haven't told you everything. We've told you what is expected, but the forecast may fall short. Why? Because of the economic takeoff that is beginning to be seen in overpopulated countries such as India, whose copper consumption is currently very low. Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and even many countries in Africa. In the coming years, demand for electricity, air conditioners, cars, new infrastructure, and housing is set to skyrocket. And what does that mean? That demand for copper could end up being much higher than what official institutions expect, which, by the way, on these issues usually tend to underestimate it. Just think about India. According to Wood Mackenzie's estimates, electricity consumption in this country will skyrocket by almost 30% in the next 5 years alone. That is absolutely crazy. Can you imagine all the renewable and non-renewable power plants that will have to be built? And that's not all. The government expects to double its renewable energy capacity, which is by far the largest consumer of copper. And the same thing that is happening in India is happening, as I said, in many other places. The reality is that the world, which is growing at breakneck speed, has a much larger population than China had when it began to take off, or than any of the developed countries have. And naturally, all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people want to catch up. And guess what? They are going to catch up. But this is the most predictable part. Even so, that's not the end of the story. When we talk about copper, we have to pay attention to 3 other new phenomena that are making the global economy truly addicted to this metal. What is the second one? Well, one that we've all been talking about lately, every day. VisualEconomik community, AI is not Netflix. It's not an app on your cell phone. AI is a voracious industrial process, a beast that consumes enormous amounts of electricity, and all that electricity has to be moved through something, copper. An artificial intelligence data center is not an office with fancy computers. It's an industrial plant that sucks up electricity 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. To give you an idea, a recent report by the International Energy Agency projects that global electricity consumption by data centers will more than double by 2030. It will rise from about 415 terawatt hours in 2024 to more than 945 terawatt hours. That's practically the entire electricity consumption of Japan. The truth, we only have to look at the capex announcements from the big tech companies, most of which is being allocated to data centers, and they're growing like wildfire, breaking all records. Amazon alone expects to invest around $200 billion in 2026. The result, by the end of the decade, all this could mean an additional consumption of copper between 1 and 2 million tons per year. An increase in demand, not included in the economic growth trend estimate we were talking about a moment ago. But let's continue. Whether the change is faster or slower, it is something that is already happening. The world is becoming electrified at all levels. We're moving from an economy based on fossil fuels to one based on electricity, or in other words, on minerals. Because installing 1 megawatt of renewable energy requires twice as much copper as 1 megawatt of coal, gas, or nuclear energy. And in 2024 alone, the world added more than 580 gigawatts of renewable energy, 93% of all new installed capacity.
Global renewable energy generation overtakes coal for the first time. Record expansion of solar and steady growth of wind power drive global shift away from fossil fuels by 2025.
And everything indicates that this process will pick up speed. Why? Because renewable energy is already competitive. It's not a question of being woke or not, but of money, which is exactly what explains things like this.
Texas was an oil monster. Now it's a solar energy monster. It already surpasses California in production.
It's not yet possible to have a system based 100% on renewable energy, and perhaps that will never happen. But when it comes to replacing old power plants or meeting new demand, renewable energy will play a key role. So what does that mean? Well, more demand for copper. How much? Some estimates point to additional demand of up to 1 million tons per year by the end of this decade. And we're not done yet. We still have to cover the fourth major phenomenon of this growing addiction. Okay, electric car sales are disappointing. At least they aren't meeting expectations, but those expectations were very ambitious. The truth is that globally, the market share of electric and hybrid cars continues to grow, and that's unlikely to change. And the data here is devastating. An electric car can use up to 3 times more copper than a combustion engine car. We can easily go from about 30 kilograms to more than 80. Add to all this the new electric buses, the arrival of robo-taxis with cars that will be electric, and even local delivery services. And well, that totals more than 1 million tons of copper per year of new demand by 2030. And we haven't even mentioned the global arms race that is unfolding, and also demands a lot more copper.
The looming gap in copper supply is set to widen as electricity demand accelerates, and new factors, such as the race for artificial intelligence and growing defense spending, increase demand for copper.
Now, put all this in a cocktail shaker, and there you have it. In the next 5 years alone, copper consumption could skyrocket by 30 to 40%. We're talking about perhaps more than 9 or 10 million tons of additional consumption per year. That's crazy. And the question is, what will happen to supply? Will it be able to keep up? Well, this is where things get really interesting. You see, as I said earlier, a copper mine is not something that can be opened overnight. From the discovery of a deposit to the extraction of the first kilo of copper, it can easily take between 10 and 20 years. This means that the mines that come into operation will be mines planned before this boom, with lower copper concentrations and probably lower yields. The result? Supply will increase, but not nearly as much as demand. In fact, it will not increase much, because 10 or 15 years ago, everything that is happening now with the consumption of this metal was not factored into the equation. For many, the only hope lies in copper recycling, which is growing rapidly. But no, that won't be enough either. At best, it would generate an additional supply of 2 million tons per year. So the numbers don't add up. And that's why more and more analysts are expecting a huge deficit of between 5 and 9 million tons per year by 2030 alone. And that's equivalent to having a deficit of between 18 and 33% of current consumption. Unsustainable. And how does the market correct these supply deficits? Through technological improvements, more efficient use use and substitutes, and although, and above all, through higher prices. Why? Because when there's a deficit, the market needs to raise prices so that deposits that were previously unprofitable become profitable, and so that companies invest in new projects. And since these projects takes years to materialize, the period of high prices and extraordinary profits for producers is extended. This is the traditional cycle for raw materials and explains the huge rise in mining companies' share price over the last year, because they're already making much more money today, but above all, because they're expected to make much more in the coming years. Although, clearly, everything has a limit. If the price of copper rises too high, it stimulates the search for and use of substitutes. Aluminium could replace it in some applications, but its conductivity is 40% lower, which greatly limits its possibilities. And then there are also those who talk about graphene, which is technically superior. The problem is that its large-scale production at reasonable costs is still in its infancy. In the medium term, copper has the upper hand. The question is, does it still have a future? Or are all these problems already reflected in the prices? Well, logically, no one has a crystal ball, but I can tell you that we're confident as others are concerned for precisely the same reason.
Copper is what really worries us. It is a mineral that is very difficult to increase supply of quickly. We are particularly concerned, and I want to highlight it as one of the key global issues for the future.
Now, do you understand why Washington is so concerned? Without copper, there's no cloud. Without copper, there's no artificial intelligence. There is no energy transition. Without copper, there's basically no electrification or high technology. And what are the major powers doing? Well, they're increasing their copper reserves and promoting new investments, because this is not just an economic issue. It could also become a geopolitical crisis. You see, Trump is determined to break China's monopoly on critical minerals. Check out this fact. China currently accounts for more than half of the world's refined copper production, and its sector is so strong that it's pushing foreign competitors out of the market. Beijing is very concerned with maintaining as much muscle as possible in this field, because that could give it tremendous influence. Trust me, the race for copper is real. And it's underway. In any case, we've now reached the end of this video, and I think the conclusion is quite clear. The world needs much more copper than it can currently produce. Demand is driven by structural forces that are not going to disappear. We're talking about trends such as global electrification, artificial intelligence, renewable energies, the military race, and the growth of countries such as India. Meanwhile, supply is constrained by mines that are running out, discoveries that are no longer as big, and development timescales measured in decades, not years. It seems copper is the new oil of the digital age. Keep an eye on it. But that said, the questions are for you. Do you think copper still has a future, or is it already a done deal? What other minerals do you think could benefit from technological changes? Tell us what you think in the comments, and let's fire up the debate. And you know, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Take care, I'll see you soon.